Good evening. Welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the City of Kettering Planning Commission for May 2nd, 2022. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Miami Valley Cable Council for televising and taping tonight's meeting for rebroadcast on Channel 6 and streaming live over the internet at mvcc.net. It will also be recorded and available for later viewing on mvcc.net. Since this meeting is both audio and video taped to form a complete record for possible appeal to City Council and/or the courts, it is important that anyone who wishes to address the Commission will need to come to the lectern, speak into the microphone, and give their name and address for the record. Planning Commission is a volunteer independent body appointed by Council whose mission is to hear all bodies involved and subsequently make a motion to approve, deny, continue, or recommend the application. All action by the Commission can be appealed to the City Council. This time I would like to introduce the Commission. On my far left is Ken Lackey, our Assistant Secretary. On his right is Carol Fisher, our Secretary. On my immediate left is Connie Gaw, our Recording Secretary. My name is Don Shimon. I am the current Chair. On my right is Ray Waskey, our current Vice Chair, and to his right is Commissioner Don Brethman. For staff this evening, we have Ryan Holmesy, City Planner. All right, first we move to items on the agenda. First item is new business. It is a conditional use 4865 Wilmington Pike. It is PC-22-008, and this is a public hearing. I'm going to assume that for the city we have Mr. Holmesy.
Yes. All right, thank you, Chairman. This first item on the agenda is at the Emmanuel Lutheran Church, which is located just west of the intersection of East Ron Road and Wilmington Pike, highlighted kind of in the red outline there. And it has been operating as a place of worship for a number of decades. And what they're seeking to do now is construct a picnic shelter kind of on the western side of the property. I have some maps a little later in the presentation. We'll show where it's going to go in more detail, but they generally want to put it here west of the existing building. The existing zoning is R1. It's surrounded by R1 zoning as well. And within this zoning district, places of worship are allowable conditional uses subject to certain standards of the Planning and Zoning Code. And if you're modifying a conditional use in certain ways, you're required to hold a public hearing with the Planning Commission in order to ensure that the proposal meets the requirements of the Planning and Zoning Code. So again, this is roughly the location where the shelter is going to be, and this is existing conditions on the ground. This is a picture looking west toward where the shelter will be. In the report and in my presentation, probably the main focus of the presentation and the report deals with the adjoining residential properties to the west, making sure that they're adequately buffered and making sure that whatever the use that's being proposed tonight won't be disruptive to those residential uses in the future. The site plan that we got from the applicant, which was included in the staff report, is on the screen now. You can see the picnic shelter. I believe it's about 35 or 45 feet deep by 30 feet wide. It will sit about 50 feet at the nearest point from the western property line. As a part of the application and as a part of the staff review, we did meet with the applicant on the site just to kind of evaluate the existing buffer yard over there. And as a part of their application, they included a proposed planting schedule for that western side of the property to meet the buffer yard requirements between this civic use and the adjoining residential properties. Architecturally, it's a fairly standard picnic shelter. The colors of the roof and the columns will match the church. They will be made out of, the roof will be standing seam metal. The columns will be finished metal as well, which will match the colors of the church. And at the base of all the columns will be brick with a burnished concrete cap, all of which will match some of the existing features on the church. As I said earlier, the main site zoning related standards deal with the buffer yard. When you have a civic use next to residential uses, the requirement is a C-type buffer yard. And there's two different alternative buffer yards they can utilize to meet the requirements, and they decided to go with the buffer yard. It's a little bit wider, but it doesn't have a fence, but has more plantings. The landscaping plan they proposed does meet the requirement for the number of plantings. One of the conditions staff is recommending is that as a part of the building permit, application, assuming that this is approved, we want to see the actual species of all the plants and shrubs they're proposing, just to make sure that they meet the Group A, Group B, and Group C designations. The applicant has agreed to do that. And the other site zoning-related standard is setbacks. Places, all structures on properties containing places of worship are required to be 35 feet from any adjoining residential property line, and the setback they're proposing is 50 feet, which exceeds that requirement by a little bit. Architecturally, the main requirements they have to meet for an accessory structure is it has to match the principal structure's color, which what they proposed will. We have asked that they confirm that when they turn in their building permit. We've already discussed it. And it must match the principal structure's design as best as possible. And they've included some features like the brick bases, the roof design, and things to help meet the architectural design of the principal structure. So we believe these standards are met. The more specific, the more general conditional use standards can be found in section 1153.08 of the Planning and Zoning Code. But before we get into that, as I said before, places of worship are allowable conditional uses in the R1 zoning district. What they're proposing is considered a major amendment per section 1153.11.b.1e. States that an amendment that reduces the distance between any internal paved surface or building in adjacent residential zoned land by more than 25% requires a public hearing before the Planning Commission, which is why we're here this evening. The general conditional use standards, these were all gone over. Staff went over all these in the report, but I'll go through them quickly tonight. And these can be found in section 1153.08.8 of the Kettering Zoning Code. Standard A, the proposed conditional use shall comply with all applicable regulations of the zoning code, which we believe it does. Letter B, the proposed conditional use shall conform to the character of the neighborhood within the same zoning district in which it is located, and shall have no more adverse effects on health, safety, or comfort of persons living or working in the neighborhood, or shall be no more interest to property or improvements in the neighborhood than would be any other use permitted by right within the same district. As outlined in the report, the proposed facility adds to an existing approved conditional use. The area where the picnic shelter is proposed is currently used occasionally for outdoor activities. This shelter will allow for an enhancement in those activities, and that this amendment would have no tangible effect upon the health, safety, or comfort of the neighborhood. Letter C, adequate utilities shall be provided. This requirement is satisfied. Letter D, adequate measures shall be taken to provide ingress and egress so designed as to prevent traffic hazards and to prevent traffic congestion on public roads. The site is currently conforming with traffic and access standards, and there's no substantial increase in traffic anticipated by this project, so this standard is met. Letter E, the proposed use will not be noxious or offensive by reason of vibration, noise, odor, dust, smoke, or gas. This standard is met. The one item that we did talk about with the applicant a little bit is that the only potential concern associated with this use is noise if the shelter is utilized in a way that is disruptive to the adjoining neighborhood. Staff has been assured that this will not occur by the applicant, as the area where the shelter is proposed is already used for outdoor activities, and no major increase in the intensity of these activities is anticipated by the shelter. And should issues arise in the future, the issues will be addressed by staff working with the operators of the shelter. Letter F, the proposed use shall not injure the use and enjoyment of the property in the immediate vicinity for the purposes already permitted, nor substantially diminish or impair property values within the neighborhood. This criteria is met. Letter H, I think I skipped letter G unintentionally, but letter G says, the proposed use shall not impede the orderly development and improvement of the surrounding property for uses permitted within the zoning district, and this proposed use will have no such effect, so this requirement is satisfied. Requirement H, the establishment, maintenance, or operation of the proposed use shall not be detrimental or endanger the public health, safety, morals, comfort, or general welfare. The proposed use will have no such detrimental effects, so this requirement is met. And finally, the last standard is the public interest and welfare supporting the proposed use shall be sufficient to outweigh the individual interests that are adversely affected by the establishment of the proposed use. And like the last couple, the proposed use will have no such adverse effects that must be outweighed. So this standard is met. And again, here is the site plan. Staff does have a recommendation. There are a few people here on both the applicant and I believe someone here on behalf of the applicant, but we have a recommendation. But before I get to that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Any questions for staff? Mr. Lackey?
I don't have any.
Ms. Fisher?
I have none.
Mr. Waske?
I have none.
Mr. Rethman?
I have none.
My only question, I think you've addressed it, but just to be clear, the applicant is aware of your recommended conditions?
Yes, they got a copy of the report.
All right. At this point, then, if the applicant would like to make a presentation, they are free to, but that is not required. I'm going to take that as you're good for now. Does commission have any questions for the applicants?
I have none.
No. Nope. All right, this is a public hearing, so this is the time for audience participation. If there is anyone in the audience who would like to address the commission on this case, now would be that time. Seeing no one coming forward, staff recommendation.
Thank you, Chairman. The staff recommendation is that the Planning Commission motion to approve the amendment to the conditional use, case number PC-22-008, with the following conditions. Number one, the species and minimum planting sizes on the landscaping plan be finalized and approved by the zoning administrator prior to the issuance of a building permit for the picnic shelter. And number two, as a part of the building permit submittal, the applicant agrees to include the colors of the proposed materials, including roofing, columns, brick bases, etc., for review and approval.
All right, any final discussion from the commission? All right, Mr. Waske, first, can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Mr. Rethman?
Yes.
Mrs. Fisher?
Yes.
Mr. Lackey?
Yes.
Mr. Waske?
Yes.
And Mr. Shimon?
Yes. All right, now, Mr. Waske, I think you have a motion for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a motion to approve the conditional use amendment for 4865 Wilmington Pike. Whereas an application has been received from Eric Sauer, 4865 Wilmington Pike, Kettering, Ohio, 45440, requesting approval of a conditional use amendment to allow a new picnic shelter at the Emmanuel Lutheran Church located on the western side of the property. And whereas the Planning Commission has reviewed the facts surrounding this request, including an oral and written report by city staff, which is incorporated herein, and held a hearing on May 2nd, 2022. And whereas this request constitutes approval of a conditional use amendment to allow a picnic shelter facility at the Emmanuel Lutheran Church located at 4865 Wilmington Pike. And whereas the Planning Commission adopts the findings of fact presented by staff in their staff report, which is incorporated into this motion, I move that the applicant's request for approval of a conditional use amendment as depicted on Exhibit 1 within the staff report to allow a picnic shelter at the Emmanuel Lutheran Church located at 4865 Wilmington Pike be approved with the following conditions. Number one, the species, type, and minimum planting sizes on the landscaping plan be finalized and approved by the zoning administrator prior to the issuance of a building permit for the picnic shelter. And number two, as part of the building permit submittal, the applicant agrees to include the colors of the proposed materials, roofing, column, brick bases, etc., for review and approval.
Second.
Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Waske?
Yes.
Mr. Rethman?
Yes.
Mrs. Fisher?
Yes.
Mr. Lackey?
Yes.
Mr. Shimon?
Yes. All right. Next item on the agenda is a lot consolidation for 3550 Far Hills Avenue. This is case PC-22-009. And once again, for staff, Mr. Holmesy.
Thanks again, Chairman. This is a very straightforward lot consolidation. The property is at 3550 Far Hills Avenue at the northeast corner of the intersection of Lincoln Park Boulevard and Far Hills Avenue. It used to contain Lincoln Park Dental. It's been vacant, I don't know exactly how long, at least since I've been here, and it's currently comprised of two parcels, and the applicant is seeking to combine those into one. And also as a part of whenever we get record plans, we send them off for review at the county level. And Environmental Services did request a 10-foot utility easement across the frontage on Far Hills. They've added that to the record plan. And there's a small area of right-of-way being dedicated along Far Hills. I believe it's just an old right-of-way parcel strip that they're going to officially dedicate. But they're basically going to take those 2 lots and consolidate them into one, and that one lot will measure about .386 acres in size. On the map, on the screen now, the red lines depict the existing property lines, and the red lines now depict the proposed property lines. As a part of the review, staff did look at we did review the record plan under the standards of section 1117.03 of Kettering's codified ordinances, and the proposed record plan meets all of the requirements except the one condition that it be, we don't have the Mylar yet, so it's not officially certified by the registered surveyor or project engineer, but we always put a condition that they ensure that they certify the Mylar when it comes in prior to Planning Commission's signature, but all the other standards are met. So staff does have a recommendation, but before I get to that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for staff, Mr. Lackey?
No.
Ms. Fisher?
No.
Mr. Waske?
I have none.
Mr. Rethman?
Nope.
I have none myself. If the applicant is here, I'm going to take that as a no. Nope. Okay. All right. Staff recommendation.
Thank you, Chairman. The staff recommendation is that the Planning Commission motion to approve the record plan, case number PC-22-009, with the following condition. The plat drawing be sealed by the surveyor prior to Planning Commission's signature.
All right. Any final comments from the commission? All right. Mr. Lackey, I believe you have a motion for us?
I do. I have an approval motion for a replat requested by Hartman Family Holdings LLC. Excuse me. Whereas an application has been received from David Weinberg and Jason Sheets of MODA 4, 23 Wayne Avenue, Dayton, Ohio, 45402, requesting approval of a record plan that would replat the 2 existing lots at 3550 Far Hills Avenue by consolidating the lots into a single lot containing 0.386 acres, and whereas this request constitutes approval of a final record plan for the newly described lot, and whereas the Planning Commission has reviewed the facts surrounding this request, including an oral and written report by city staff, which is incorporated herein, I move that the applicant's request for approval of a final record plan for the Hartman Family Holdings LLC record plan be approved with the following condition. Condition 1, the plat drawing be sealed by the surveyor prior to Planning Commission signature.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Any final discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Lackey?
Yes.
Mrs. Fisher?
Yes.
Mr. Rathman?
Yes.
Mr. Waske?
Yes.
Mr. Shimon?
Yes. All right. On to our third item on the agenda. This is a replat for 532 Canterbury Drive. This is case PC-22-010. And for staff, Mr. Holmesy.
Thanks again, Chairman. This item is fairly straightforward, but it has a couple interesting comments that I've included in the report. I'll include them in the presentation, but this is somewhat similar to the last request. The property at 532 Canterbury Drive contains the one lot to the west, which has the house on it, and then there's a vacant lot to the east. They want to combine those together. My understanding is this was triggered by the desire of the owner of the property to build an addition onto the house that would cross the property line to the east of the house. And if you drove by the site, one thing you probably notice is the presence of some overhead utility lines that run between those two properties today. They'll have to relocate those as a part of that addition project. So when I get to the recommendation, one of the conditions deals with ensuring that where they relocate those lines, they have an easement on the plat drawing before it's recorded that AES is okay with before the Planning Commission provides signatures on that plat drawing. So here's the record plan. Similar to the last one, the existing lot lines are highlighted in red. The proposed lot lines are highlighted in red here. One item that we noticed was missing. There's no lot number assigned to the proposed lot, so they'll have to add lot 1. Very simple thing to fix. That's another condition that staff is recommending. Also, since they are relocating some power lines, here is the 2 properties in question right here. The blue line depicts where the power lines run today. The red line depicts where they're approximately going to be relocated to. We want to make sure that there is an easement in place when they relocate those lines as a part of the plat. And this isn't necessarily final, but this was provided to me by the applicant when we asked about it. And they are currently working with AES on finalizing this relocation right now. So as I said before, when the zoning and subdivision review was done with this request, while looking at the standards of section 1117.03, the 3 items that stood out were the easement standard, that all the easements, any existing and requested easements be shown on the plat drawing. We recommended a condition associated with that standard. The standard that the lot numbers be labeled, we recommended a condition that they label the lot as lot number 1. And then finally, the standard condition about certifying the Mylar when it comes in was recommended as a condition as well. So with that, we do have a recommendation, but for now, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for staff? Mr. Lackey, Ms. Fisher,
None.
Mr. Waskey,
I have none.
Mr. Rethman.
No questions.
My only question is, and you answered it a little bit there, the applicant is aware of the conditions that.
Yes, I sent the report off to the applicant. I didn't get any responses back, but they do have a copy of it, and I discussed the one about the easements is probably the most critical one that we talked about, and I talked to them about that on Friday.
Okay. At this time, this is the time for the applicant to make a presentation, if they would choose to. Seeing none at this time, and this not being a public hearing, staff recommendation.
Thank you, Chairman. The staff recommendation is that the Planning Commission motion to approve the record plan, case number PC-22-010, with the following conditions. Number 1, the plat drawing be sealed by the surveyor prior to Planning Commission's signature. Number 2, the lot being created by this record plan be labeled as Lot 1 prior to Planning Commission's signature. And finally, number 3, a utility easement that meets the satisfaction of AES Ohio and any other applicable utility companies must be shown on the final Mylar prior to Planning Commission's signature.
All right. Any further commission comments or discussion? All right. Mr. Rethman, I believe you have a motion for us.
I do, Mr. Chair. I have a motion for the Hillsdale subdivision, Lot 121 and 122 replat. Whereas an application has been received from Jenny Diorio of Diorio Construction, 5975 Kentshire Drive, Kettering, Ohio, 45440, requesting approval of a record plan that would replat the 2 existing lots at 532 Canterbury Drive by consolidating the lots into a single lot containing 0.9533 acres. And whereas this request constitutes approval of a final record plan for the newly described lot, and whereas the Planning Commission has reviewed the facts surrounding this request, including an oral and written report by city staff, which is incorporated herein. I move that the applicant's request for approval of a final record plan for the Hillsdale subdivision, Lot 121 and 122, be approved with the following conditions. Number 1, the plat drawing be sealed by the surveyor prior to Planning Commission signature. Number 2, the lot being created by this record plan be labeled as Lot 1 prior to Planning Commission signature. Number 3, a utility easement that meets the satisfaction of AES Ohio and any other applicable utility companies must be shown on the final Mylar prior to Planning Commission signature. This concludes my motion.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any final discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Rethman?
Yes.
Mr. Lackey?
Yes.
Mrs. Fisher?
Yes.
Mr. Waskey?
Yes.
Mr. Shemin?
Yes. All right, moving on to the 4th item under new business on our agenda, audience participation. At this time, if there is anyone in the audience who would like to come down and address the commission on anything other than the cases that were on the agenda for this evening, this is the time to do that. Seeing none, moving on to other business, signing of plats,
We don't have any.
communications and reports.
Nothing to report this evening.
Planning Commission comments, Mr. Lasky. Ms. Fisher.
Nothing.
Mr. Woski.
I have none.
Mr. Rethman.
Nope.
I have none myself. That being the case, we will adjourn to our next regularly scheduled meeting at 7:25.